Mark Rogers TV breaking down positional units across the country. We stop in the ACC at Virginia Tech with, of course, Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC to help us on the Hokies. Mike, let's talk some offensive line because it all starts there in regards to generating offense. And we've run the numbers. We've talked about it in past segments that there were good spots, there were bad spots for Virginia Tech's offense, but considering the fluctuation because of injury at quarterback, the emergence of Trayvon McMillan, the offensive line steady for the most part. Can you kind of assess what happened in 2015 up front?
Yeah, so when looking back to last season, I think the one thing that was pretty clear about the Hokies, especially when they struggled at most on offense, was the fact that their offensive line was kind of hit and miss as far as the consistency department was concerned. When they were playing at their best, they were a steady unit, a group that, kind of blocked well for the running back, specifically Trayvon McMillan, as he came on in early October throughout the rest of the season. And then, of course, in the passing game where, when Virginia Tech ran the ball best, it seemed like the passing offense really flourished as well as it had all season long. So I think when looking at the offensive line up front, they're a veteran group at this point in time. And I think with the new offense that we'll get into here in a second, we can talk about how that'll kind of change things for the Hokies moving forward. But, overall, when looking at the statistics for the Hokies, they were 74th nationally in total offense last year. That's not bad, but it's not great. 81st in the rushing offense, which is a little bit of a surprise that they were that low. But when you consider how poorly they ran the ball over the first quarter of the season, it's not a huge surprise. That's a lot of ground that you have to make up against some of the better rushing teams in the country. And their passing offense was ranked 64th, 225.8 yards per game. That's something that surprises a lot of people because it looked like Virginia Tech was struggling to throw the football for most of the season last year, especially when Michael Brewer went out in the Ohio State game. It was a Brendan Motley show, and he struggled staying consistent in the pocket, until Michael Brewer returned later in the season. So it's kind of surprising to a lot of people that Virginia Tech was ranked 64th nationally in total passing yards, in total passing offense last year. But when taking a step back and looking at it, Virginia Tech was trailing in a lot of those games. They were passing a lot more than they would have usually. And then when you add Trayvon McMillan into the fold, the passing yards kind of started to quietly accumulate a little bit more than it had in the past because they had a more balanced offense. So moving forward, for Virginia Tech to be successful, it's all going to start up front, especially with the new offense under Justin Fuente.
Yeah, of course, McMillan emerged almost halfway through the season. So single-digit carries the first 5 games of the year. Then he got his first double-digit carry game against NC State and exploded 11 for 96 yards. And then it was obviously his rushing offense from that point forward. And if you look at his production against the good quality teams in the ACC, not great rushing defensive teams, except Boston College, where he slugged it out 33 times for 105 yards. Nice yards per carry statistics out of him against Georgia Tech, Duke, Miami, North Carolina, and the like throughout the rest of the season, including the bowl game. So Trayvon McMillan, obviously, we've talked about him looking for a breakout season, even more so here in 2016. So when you look at the personnel, my first glance at it, Mike, is that very solid in the one deep. The starters look good, but of course you need numbers, you need depth, and then there are a lot of question marks past that.
Definitely. The one thing about Virginia Tech is that they have depth, but their depth is very young. The guys that are going to be starting up front, expected anyway, at least through the spring and then throughout the fall camp thus far. Augie Conte is going to be a redshirt senior. He'll definitely be in the mix. A guy that's definitely going to be a starter on that offensive line. Played a lot of right guard last year. He's a redshirt senior. You got Jonathan McLaughlin, a true senior, who's going to play either left or right tackle. They've kind of shuffled him around a bit in the past. Played a lot of right tackle last year, mixed in a bit at left tackle as well. Eric Gallo, he's a junior, started all 13 games for the Hokies last year at center. He's expected to be the guy snapping the ball to whoever the quarterback's going to be. Wyatt Teller, a redshirt junior, he's expected to be the left guard for the Hokies. He's probably the most talented lineman on this offensive front for Virginia Tech. A guy, in my opinion, if he has another season much like he had last year, could end up being a dark horse for an all-ACC team. And then the other tackle, it's kind of up in the air. Parker Osterloh has mixed in a bit in the past. He's a redshirt junior. Joshua Nijman, he's a sophomore. He played a good bit last year. He kind of shuffled around guard tackle, played kind of all over the line. And that's kind of the story of the Virginia Tech offensive line last year. Nobody was really set in stone except for really Eric Gallo and at center, and then left guard Wyatt Teller. Those were really the only two guys on the offensive line that kind of stayed in their position. The tackles often flipped. Augie Conte, he went from tackle to guard. And Virginia Tech, I think under Justin Fuente, is going to want to have a more consistent front, maybe 5, 6, 7 guys rotating in, but maybe just rotating in one position, not necessarily having one guy rotate in 3 or 4 positions like they've had in the past. So consistency is key for the Hokies here on the offensive line. Now, when talking about the offense for Justin Fuente, Mark, when looking at it, it's obviously an offense that's much different from Scott Loeffler's offense that he left behind as he moves on to Boston College. What Justin Fuente has done in the past, he's focused on the quick passing game and building on the pass with the running game. I think that what's going to happen with Virginia Tech is the offensive line is not necessarily going to have to hold their blocks as long. I think it's going to be a line that is going to be kind of measured against the quick passing game, which I think is going to be extremely important. What we saw out of Virginia Tech a lot last year under Scott Loeffler's offense was the fact that whoever the quarterback was, either Brendan Motley, Michael Brewer, Dwayne Lawson at times, generally had to hold the ball a little bit too long because they would develop longer passing routes instead of maybe focusing on short and intermediate passing game. It seemed like every time the Hokies trailed, instead of kind of going back to the run game, if it was working, Scott Loeffler wanted to get it all back in one play. And that's what really frustrated Virginia Tech Hokies fans last year, is they saw the offensive line really struggling anyway. And then to top it off, Scott Loeffler's play calling wasn't great either. Having a lot of the longer developing passing routes, trying to break the game open with Isaiah Ford and Bucky Hodges. And while that's a good strategy to have at times, it's not a good strategy on every single passing play, which is what we saw, especially when the Hokies were trailing last year. So the fact that the offensive line is not necessarily going to have to hold blocks as long, especially in the passing game, and hopefully they're as successful as they were in run blocking, especially considering how Trayvon McMillan performed in the second half of last season, with one consistent running back, a guy that they know is going to hit the hole hard every time, and they know who they're blocking for. Every running back's different, but if it only takes a little bit, of a hole for running back to break the game open, I think that really helps knowing who's back there. And Trayvon McMillan's going to be the guy for Virginia Tech moving forward in this offense. And I think that's huge as well. So it takes one cohesive unit up front. We hear that a lot, all the platitudes that a lot of people like to speak of when talking about offensive lines, but this really matters for the Hokies moving forward, is that they have a consistent front and guys know where they're going to be playing every week. And I think that Justin Fuente's offense is going to make the line's job a little bit easier moving forward, knowing that the passing game is going to be focused on the short and intermediate routes a little bit more than in the past, and the running game is going to be key moving forward for the Hokies.
And just to elaborate, Mike, on that theme in regards to experience versus depth and quality experience. So reviewing the roster, you got 6 guys who have playing experience. So that seems alarming because you got 5 starters right off the bat, and then you've only got one other guy that has any playing experience. But I think if we review offensive lines across the conference, across the country, tons of quality teams are in the same predicament. It's usual. There's turnover in college football. That's the way it is. You got 4 guys with multiple experience, and we're talking about the suspects that we know and that Hokie fans are familiar with, and quality guys like Conte, McLaughlin, Teller, and Gallo. Those are the 4 guys with multiple years experience. You got 2 seniors, of course, that's Conte and McLaughlin. You got 5 juniors, 4 sophomores, and then all that depth you were talking about on the young end. So we'll see in future years if this is quality depth with 6 redshirt freshmen, 6 true freshmen. That's 12 freshmen total along the offensive line that we probably won't see this year, but guys that we'll see a portion of them. And we know how the numbers play out. The probabilities say a couple of those guys, you need 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of those guys to be decent players. Couple hopefully are going to be impact players, all ACC kind of guys, but then the rest are going to fade off and just be practice players for their stay at Virginia Tech. All right, it all starts at the offensive line. Virginia Tech trying to figure it out at quarterback. They will need blocking up front. Trayvon McMillan can't do it on his own. So that's the rundown up front for the Hokies. Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC, of course, always helping us out. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thank you, Mark.